Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of 1990's Represent. We're still in our third cycle in 1997, talking about a movie on this episode. In this episode, we're talking about Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, the first film in the Austin Powers trilogy. Um, Potentially, they're working on a fourth, but nothing's really come out of that. But first film in the Austin Powers series. I remember seeing commercials for this back in 1997. I remember calling my best friend and saying, "Hey, are we gonna see that movie?" It was kind of like we would just like talk and be like, "Okay, we're absolutely seeing this. We're absolutely seeing that." So him and I went to it. We had a great time. He was definitely more into the British kind of comedy and like film and TV than I was. He was definitely like into like Faulty Towers and Monty Python. So I think he was definitely more interested in the film than I was, but we both went, had an awesome time with it. It's still a fun movie. There's some elements of it that I don't think hold up particularly well, but it's kind of more just like a cultural, not cultural necessarily, but like a societal kind of thing where like there's definitely a lot from Austin Powers' character to Elizabeth Hurley's character, just a ton of like sexual harassment and stuff like that. Stuff that like I don't know if it would necessarily how it would play now. I think knowing it's a 007 kind of parody, it kind of works just because those films were very much in that tone as well. But it will be interesting to see because I know I've read rumors that they're potentially working on or maybe considering doing a fourth film. So to see how they would kind of change up the characters for like the current like political climate and stuff like that to see if that would be any different or if they would just go kind of head first and do it like the first three Austin Powers films. It'd be interesting to see how they actually pull that off. But see this one, saw the second one. Then I didn't end up seeing the third one in theaters. I saw the first two in theaters, but not the third. Eventually saw that on like DVD or something like that. But first one here, the second one definitely made more money. I think this one made like something like $67 million in 1997, while the sequel, The Spy Who Shagged Me, made something like 300 million. So the second one definitely made a lot more money. The nice thing about this movie, it's like only an hour and a half, so it's a very easy watch. But rented it on Amazon, watched it a couple nights ago. Still had a lot of fun with it, but there was, like I said earlier, there was like some stuff that doesn't hold up particularly well. Let's see here. So the character kind of came to Mike Myers when like his dad in the '60s and '70s had introduced him to a lot of the kind of British film of the time, a lot of the James Bond stuff, a lot of the other films and TV shows. His dad passed away in 1991, and reflecting on that, he kind of ended up making the movie kind of his dad's kind of like influence inspired the film in that way, where his dad was the one that introduced him to a lot of the stuff that this movie kind of parodies, which is pretty nice. Doctor Evil, the kind of like the mannerisms and all that, apparently were based on a Dana Carvey impersonation of Lorne Michaels. According to my research, I don't think Dana Carvey was too pleased with Mike Myers using that as the basis, but that's kind of like, so I don't really know if they were, so that was like there was some tension between them at the time, I think. There's just tons of James Bond references. I actually wrote them into a little notepad thing here, and I'm gonna bring those up really quick. So basically, beginning of the movie, he gets unfrozen. There's like a shower sequence where they're on like a conveyor belt. That's, you could definitely see that in Doctor No. Some of like Doctor Evil's lair resembles kind of Doctor No's lair when like they're kind of like underneath, like I think it's like on like an island. There's obviously random task is definitely a nod to Odd Job. Instead of throwing a hat, he throws a shoe. It knocks like a statue's head off, like it does in Goldfinger. But then when he does it to Austin, he just throws a shoe. He's like, it gets hit. He's like, who throws a shoe? Seriously, that really hurt. So just funny gags like that. But there are just tons of James Bond references, and the more familiar you are with the James Bond series, the more you'll definitely enjoy this movie. So there's just a ton of those sprinkled throughout the movie. Apparently, Jim Carrey was in talks to potentially play Doctor Evil in this movie. I think he had to back out due to scheduling conflicts with Liar Liar. But Mike Myers was initially not going to play multiple characters. It was just going to be him playing Austin Powers, Jim Carrey as Doctor Evil. I would actually really like to have seen how that turned, how that would have looked. That would be really interesting. But again, Jim Carrey had to back out, and then we got Mike Myers as Doctor Evil. It's just a very iconic performance, and I actually think it kind of sets the tone for the whole series because Mike Myers does basically pulling double duty, playing both Austin Powers and Doctor Evil, and just it's a really interesting kind of like study on like his like acting throughout those films. And then I think he definitely then took on like additional characters in some of the other films as well. So here it's two. I think he plays like Fat Bastard in like the second one and so on. But that would have been interesting. Robert Wagner and Michael York are also in this. This may have been the first movie I've seen with Robert Wagner. But like a year after this, he did Wild Things, playing because Tom Baxter's the character's name, one of the lawyers in that movie. But he's in this. Michael York, who I had only seen Michael York in one other thing, I think, and it was Logan's Run, because in theaters before this movie came out, we were having a like social studies class about like population, and they showed Logan's Run in that class because the population control is a critical part of that movie where you basically have that gem in your hand and it like lights up and you got to go to carousel and excuse me, the whole thing's basically a scam, and people think if they get to the top of carousel they get like a new more years to live basically. But Michael York is in that. He plays like the main character in that film, so I recognize him from that. Um, Daniel Craig had a really interesting quote where basically when he was cast as James Bond, basically in Casino Royale through No Time to Die, they had to make his movies much more serious because the Austin Powers series, because all three of them had come out um, between 1997 and 2002, and just he was basically saying how the Austin Powers movies kind of ruined the James Bond movies to the point where they couldn't do the kind of gags that you had in like the Roger Moore era or even up to the Pierce Brosnan era, because even some of the Pierce Brosnan stuff gets campy at times. But let me bring that quote up from Daniel Craig. Yeah, he basically says, um, "quote We had to destroy the myth because Mike Myers effed us." And then it said it was impossible to do the gags in the other Bond movies, which Austin Powers had basically parodied. That's a hard word to say for some reason. But basically, they had to rethink the entire kind of series based on Austin Powers, like basically kind of ruined a lot of that kind of stuff going forward. I don't think it ruined any of the older films or anything like that. But they tried those gags again. It would have been weird, like trying to do those gags of like, especially the Roger Moore era, with Daniel Craig, because the Austin Powers movies had kind of like parodied like a lot of them, like a ton of those gags. Let's see what we got here. Here's the plot. All right, and we're now going to get into the plot of the film here. We actually just bring. Oh yeah, we're going to do that for the plot. We're good. So, plot basically, the main concept of the film is it starts off in 1967. Both Austin Powers and Dr. Evil get cryogenically frozen and they get thawed out in 1997. So it's like a fish out of water movie for both characters. But it starts off in the 60s. It's like the swinging 60s in London. They get a tip that Dr. Evil's going to try to put a hit out on Austin Powers at this nightclub. They go there. The assassination attempt doesn't go forward. They chase Dr. Evil down. He gets into a cryogenic freezing chamber, and it freezes. It takes off. It's like a big boy restaurant, so it's basically a big boy. The kind of like iconic. Big boy's holding like the plate or whatever, the burgers or whatever it is, that flies up into space, and it's in orbit for like 30 or so years. It comes back. I remember like Clint Howard's in this movie. He basically is like the NORAD, I think, is the radio operator. He's like, "Hey, we got a big boy." And they're like, "Big boy?" That the general's like, "I think it's been around years." He's like, "Well, big boy never really left. He still gets really good value out of these meals or whatever it is." But Doctor Evil reemerges in 1997, sets up his kind of criminal empire, has all of his henchmen and like minions there. and they're talking about plans to world domination, your typical James Bond villain kind of stuff. And at one point, Robert Wagner plays number two. It's basically a parody of Emilio Largo from Thunderball. He's got the eye patch and all that. And they're like, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that Prince Charles is having an affair, and we're going to like blackmail the royal family, and then they'll have to get divorced. And Robert Wagner's like, well, that technically already happened, like, and they are currently divorced. Interesting thing about this movie is it came out in like May of '97. I think Princess Diana passed away in like August. So it was kind of like watching it now. I was just like, oh yeah, kind of like it was just like just an interesting kind of like thing about like how that's mentioned in the movie, and then later on that now that person is no longer alive. So the joke I don't think necessarily like works as well. Anyhow, another evil plan is to like deplete the ozone layer. They're basically like going like let's aim lasers up at the ozone layer, destroy it, so the ultraviolet radiation gets through and like causes skin cancer. Number two, I almost called him Largo. Like number two is like the ozone layer is already depleted, and it's kind of already like happening. Dr. Evil's plan is just like, okay, like screw it, let's just like hijack some nuclear weapons to do world domination. And everybody's like, all right, cool, we're down to that. And then he says something about like, oh, hold the world ransom for $1 million. And number two chimes back in again. He's like, well, technically, like $1 million isn't a lot of money anymore. Like we actually have like Dr. Evil's like Shell Corporation that like owns like cable companies and shipping, and they own like a factory in Chicago that makes replicas of factories, and they have like various businesses and all that. So basically, he's like, okay, we'll hold the world ransom for $100 billion instead. They're like, okay, well, Doctor Evil's back. We need to bring back the person that can probably like put him down or take him out, and that's Austin Powers. He's also cryogenically frozen. They go through like this cryo. It's basically almost like the cryo prison from Demolition Man. But you see, like there's like Gary Oldman's in there in the celebrity wing of this museum or this. It's not a prison necessarily, but like it's that vibe of Demolition Man. But you see Gary Coleman's in there. There's like a Vanilla Ice is on ice. They defrost Austin, and it's basically like very Demolition Man like, where they cut him out of ice. They put him in the warm liquid goo phase. They defrost him. He's on the conveyor belt, which is very much the kind of same thing from Doctor No. There's a gag about him like urinating, which is also in A League of Their Own as well. Like they're trying to time it. They get Austin Powers out. They introduce him to Vanessa, who is played by Elizabeth Hurley. She's basically there to kind of get him up to speed on what's going on in the '90s. This is where you get the scene after he gets all his. They're like, here's all your stuff. We have like your shirt. Here's your jacket. Here's your gun. And here's a Swedish made enlarger pump. He's like, that's not mine. He's like, here's the receipt with your credit card on it. Here is a warranty card filled out by you. And he's like, this isn't my bag. And he's like, here's a book about this enlarger pump and me by Austin Powers. Anyway, so they are now working together. She's trying to get him caught up on like in the kind of ways of the '90s. They go to Las Vegas. They meet up with number two, and they're playing blackjack. Very like parodying a lot of the gambling scenes in the films. Other henchmen are brought in. There's like the Lucky Charms. He's like they're always trying to get me Lucky Charms. Everybody's laughing. He's like, what's so funny? And the lady who is supposed to be like, I think Elsa Clem is the character's name from Russia with Love, but she's like, oh, it's like you say the Lucky Charms. It's like the cereal with the leprechaun, and everybody's like laughing about that. Anyway, Austin goes into a bathroom. Tom Arnold has a cameo in this scene as well, where he's like, who does number two work for? And it's kind of like this joke about pooping, basically. But they get information from that. They then are Scott Evil is also in this movie. Seth Green. So they're like, hey, remember, like we basically took like sperm from you. You have a son now. This is Scott Evil. Scott's like kind of like supposed to be like a Gen X slacker, I guess. Wants nothing to do with Dr. Evil, because he's like, you've been gone for like this many, like I've never met you before in my life, man. Like, what is this? This is ridiculous. So Scott Evil, obviously the son of Dr. Evil here. They eventually have a kind of cutaway scene where Austin and Vanessa are on a date. They're like Burt Bacharach is playing like music. It's kind of fun, but it's like also like some of the stuff in the movie is very random in that way. He goes to a penthouse of number two's assistant, gets information out of her. Um, they then are brought in. The fembots come in. The fembots are robots that got the machine guns, and like he's like I like, and Doctor Evil makes a joke. He's like, I like their caliber. I don't think anybody gets it. He's like caliber, like their personality, and then also like the caliber of the firearm. Doctor Evil's like, all right, whatever, like forget it. Doctor Evil and Scott go to like a father son counseling. Great cameo in here from Carrie Fisher. I don't think she's even credited in the movie, but she's the kind of like leading of the father son like bonding like meeting, and they go there, they do all that kind of stuff. Doctor Evil then eventually they do get the nuclear weapon. They're like they blame or bribe the UN. They're like, hey UN, we're gonna blow this, like we're gonna to drill into the earth with this weapon and like activate it underground, and all the lava from volcanoes is gonna like erupt. And then Doctor Evil forgets how much money he has for. He's like, we'll do it for $1 million, and they all start laughing. And he calls him back. He's like, $100 million, and of course Doctor Evil's got the whole thing with the pinky going on. So they have the weapon. They eventually do capture Austin and Vanessa, and they're like a final showdown at Doctor Evil's base, where or Doctor Evil's base. They like the corporation that number two runs has tours of their facilities. So Austin and Vanessa go on one of these tours disguised as like a married couple. And this is one of my favorite gags in a lot of movies is they see two people in the corporation clothing. I think it's like Lexicorp, maybe. I forget the name of the company. But they go into the restrooms, and then Austin and Vanessa go in after them, steal their clothes, and come out basically wearing clothes to kind of blend in. It's very much like Luke and Han taking Stormtrooper gear, basically. But the favorite gag is like they basically walk into the door. The door shuts, and like a second later, it cuts to the door opening with them in their clothing. Like obviously, like they would be in there longer if they were getting attacked. Like obviously, it's under the impression that they attacked the people that were in there and took their clothes. They do the same gag in the first Anchorman movie where like they're like Ron Burgundy goes into the like a room looking all kind of beat up. He just shuts the door. Second later, it opens and he's wearing his normal like Ron Burgundy clothes. I just love that gag in movies. It's like one of my favorite little like jokes because it's very silly because there's no way they're changing that quickly. But they get captured. Then Seth Green has one of my favorite parts of the movie where they're talking about he's like hey, well, like we got him, we've got them both captured. Let's just go in there and kill them. Give me a gun, I'll go in there. It'll be like 1, 2, we're done. And then Dr. Evil's like, you just don't get it, do you? But it parodies the whole thing about like in the James Bond movies, there's multiple opportunities, ample opportunity for the villain to just get rid of James Bond once and for all. They never do it. And then of course James Bond escapes and foils all their plans and all that. So that's a really good joke with that kind of thing. Because they're like, a lot of times the villain just like over explains the plan. It's like, my plan is to do this, this, and this. And then the only time it got weird was like, not weird, but like interesting was like in Goldfinger, he's like, do you expect me to talk? And Goldfinger's like, no, I expect you to die. That's like actually like a thing where it kind of turned that thing on its head. But then of course a lot of the other James Bond movies like fall back onto the thing where they have plenty of time to kill Bond, but they don't. So that's a reference there. Austin fights off the fembots. And like the song by I Touch Myself by the Vitals comes on. He basically just overloads them with his charm. It's pretty interesting, pretty funny. And then Doctor Evil escapes again, freezes himself again. And then at the end of the film, Austin and Vanessa are married, and they do this running gag in I think pretty much all the films. But they have like parts where the nudity is covered by something else. So there's a part where like Austin, Vanessa is standing behind him, and he grabs like 2 like melons and holds them up. There's a part where Austin basically has a gigantic champagne bottle covering his like private area. Just those gags in those movies were always just like really kind of like clever ways to like hide like potential nudity through Like there's even one where it's actually like a painting of breast that like Elizabeth Hurley's character is holding like over her chest. So just very funny in that regard. Like I said, I watched this again recently. Had a really good time watching it. It was like an hour and a half. There was some, like I said, there was some stuff that kind of like the sexual harassment stuff. Kind of, I don't think necessarily works because it's weird because it's like she's initially against it. He's very kind of like aggressive towards her, and then they end up married anyway. But then in the second film, she's barely in it, and I think that was kind of like a what's the word I'm looking for? A conscious choice by the filmmakers to be like, okay, the love interest from any James Bond movie generally either like in I think in Honor Majesty's Secret Service ends up getting killed, or the like a character that he ends up basically hooking up with in one movie is never seen again in any other films. Like in Goldeneye, you never see Natalia again after that movie. I don't know if there's any actual crossover like characters aside from like the main like Bond, M, Moneypenny. There may have been some. I know like there were some crossover characters, but a lot of times like the Bond girls are kind of like one and done. They're in a film, they usually don't show up again. I think that was kind of like a joke in the second film where Elizabeth Hurley's character like shows up and then is like turns out she's a fembot and then like gets like killed in like this like huge cartoonist fashion, and then you never have that character mentioned again generally. But I think that was like a choice because like usually the Bond girls don't like go from film to film normally. But that is Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. Still a very fun movie, like an hour and a half, so very easy to watch. I had a lot of fun with it. But that's going to do it for this episode. So remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll be back again in a few days with a video game from 1997, and then we'll be moving back into 1998 and 1999, and starting all over again after that. But that's going to do it for now, so thanks again for watching. Take care and have a good one. See ya.